Hi everyone, I'm Natalie Alexander. Welcome to the Commons here at the UN Library and Archives, Geneva, and to the journey to the Summit of the Future. How we include and engage youth in multilateralism is a key issue in the lead up to the summit. There are 1.2 billion young people alive today. How do we ensure that they have a genuine place in voicing and leading the solutions we need for our world, particularly when we look at the climate crisis? I'm here with Aneschka Berchtold, who is a Swiss youth representative to the United Nations here in Geneva. She's also a political science student engaged in climate activism. Aneschka, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
So let's begin a little bit with you. You are recently a Swiss youth representative. Tell us why you chose to be one and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, so I've started my mandate this summer, and before that I've been engaged in different projects for many years. I started being politically engaged, I would say, at the age of 14, where I hosted a radio show on the age of 16, or 14. And then at 16, I was on a national TV debate with at the time, president and members of parliament about the climate. And I had a project with a member of parliament as well. Then I went on exchange, and after that, I kind of didn't know how to get back involved, or of course, I was still going to climate strikes because that is really important to me to advocate for what is important to me. But I was lacking this one project that I could really put in a lot of energy and time. And then I was scrolling one day through a newsletter at my high school, and I just saw the mandate, and I was like, wow, this is it, I want to do it. So I applied, and very much to my delight, they actually selected me. So yeah, here I am. And maybe to the second part of your question about what it means to me to be a UN youth representative. So I would maybe describe it with three words: responsibility, motivation, and privilege. Responsibility, because in Switzerland, everybody under the age of 26 counts as young people or as youth, and that is approximately 2.5 million people. That is a big group of people, and we as a team of Swiss youth reps, we're 6 people, we try to represent these people on an international level adequately. Through our different experiences and also interests, we are really a well-balanced team. For example, Flora, my co-delegate, is a medicine student, or Arlinda is a teacher, and we bring these expertise together to form a team and to represent Swiss youth adequately, and yeah, try to, like that, make sure that we use our privilege also responsibly. Then motivation, through going to conferences and being involved in international politics, I met a lot of inspiring and ambitious young people, and that really motivates me to keep going every day. And then the last part, privilege. So even though the costs are covered when we go somewhere, when we go to a conference, we're not paid for doing any of the work we do during the week, when we prepare consultations, for example. And I just moved to another city for my studies this summer, and I currently don't have a paid job, and if my parents would not support me, I could not be doing what I'm doing. So I think it's a great privilege and honor to be able to do that. And I'm therefore also trying to use my privilege wisely by also being the voice of less privileged youth.
Yeah, we appreciate you sharing that. You mentioned that there are 6 youth representatives, each with a focus. And for you, it's climate activism, but also gender and how these two intersect. What is it that you hope to achieve in your role and the time that you have with regard to these issues?
Generally, I would like to just listen to Swiss youth and try to bring their points forward by, for example, lobbying within our Department of Foreign Affairs, or having statements at international conferences, such as the General Assembly of the UN. And more specifically on climate and gender, I would like to raise awareness on topics such as the interlinkedness of the climate crisis and, for example, period poverty, and how especially people with a uterus are affected by the climate crisis. And I'm trying to do that at all levels. So at the local level by doing school visits, going to schools and talking to young people directly, at the national level through, as I already mentioned, lobbying within our Department of Foreign Affairs, and internationally through, for example, engagements like these, or going to the UN and having statements there.
Yeah, we'll look a little bit more at the intersection of climate and gender in a moment. But If we look a little bit more at the state of our world today with regard to climate, we're recording this episode in early 2024. The world recently had COP28 in November and December 2023. There were various outcomes at the summit. One clear, perhaps, disappointment is that parties to the Paris Climate Change Agreement are off track to meet the Paris Agreement goals. One area perhaps you'd like to elaborate on with regard to youth is that parties to COP28 agreed to institutionalize the role of the presidency of a youth climate champion to be able to enhance meaningful participation of youth in COP. What is your response to this? Do you think that this is a step forward for youth inclusion?
So yes, I definitely think it's a step towards the right direction to have a presidency youth climate champion. The youth climate champion is urged to facilitate meaningful youth engagement in climate action, but also in UNFCCC processes. An issue that I see, however, is that this person is chosen by the presidency, and in the example of last year's presidency, the United Arab Emirates, it's a country that is heavily dependent on fossil fuels, and therefore I fear that the presidency's youth climate champion will not echo the youth demands correctly. But one solution, or maybe why I still think it's important that that the person is chosen by the presidency, is because if this person were to have political power, it is necessary that the presidency chooses that person. And that creates kind of a dilemma, right? And I think one way of solving that is a strong collaboration, strategic collaboration and coordination with Youngo, the youth constituency of the UNFCCC. And yeah, I think through that we can ensure that the presidency youth climate champion is more there to give access to young people to these areas, and Youngo makes sure that the voices are correctly amplified.
Yeah, you mentioned Youngo, and so I wanted to ask you about that. The COP28 Global Youth Statement was also released at COP28, and it was coordinated by Youngo. There were, of course, various demands and proposals in the statement, but with regard to action and empowerment, the statement calls for parties to establish mechanisms that make sure that young people, people with disabilities, Indigenous people, and women would be in national negotiating teams, and they would have full access to be able to have position statements and be part of consultations. What is your response to this?
Yeah, so Youngo, I mean, it's really important, the work that they do, and I think a big part of what Youngo is also doing is calling for evidence-based policies and helping young people to voice their opinion. And maybe one initiative that is not directly linked to Youngo, but a program that enables meaningful youth engagement in these processes is also the Climate Youth Negotiator program. Because what we lack, or what often is a problem with young people who are involved in these processes, is that they're so complex that it's hard to come there prepared and know what to do. And so we need more programs like, for example, the Youth Negotiator program that helps young people develop negotiation skills, explains the processes to them, and yeah, make sure that their voice is correctly amplified and there, and that they can the biggest impact possible.
Yeah. Do you think that programs that help to build these negotiation skills, that's one way? Are there any other barriers that you think we need to be working on to ensure that there is effective youth inclusion in multilateral processes for climate?
Yeah, so I think there are multiple barriers when we talk about youth delegates. So within official delegation of states, a barrier that there is that not every state handles that in the same way. So there are not international guidelines, or states are basically not forced to have youth delegates and to include young people and make their voices heard. So it really varies from country to country how much of an impact young people can have. And so what I would really welcome is the UN coordinating that a bit more. That is for sure one barrier. Also just the willingness of states to actually include young people and not just give them a seat at the table because there's an empty seat, but because they also see how they can profit of young people. Because I do think that young people bring a valuable input that also countries can learn from.
Yeah. If we kind of look at the state of multilateralism today, in his statement at the closing of COP28, the UN Secretary General stated that multilateralism remains humanity's best hope. It is essential to come together around real, practical, and meaningful climate solutions that match the scale of the climate crisis. In your view, is multilateralism capable of addressing this huge climate crisis that we're facing?
I agree with the Secretary General that multilateralism is our best hope to solve the current crisis we're facing, because multilateralism for me translates into good communication. But right now, the communication is not so good. When we look at all the crises we're facing, the war in Ukraine, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, or the conflict in Sudan, we clearly see that something is very wrong with the system. Additionally, the climate crisis makes all of these situations, or creates more situations, especially in already vulnerable areas, that can lead to further threats to international peace and security. So, yeah, we're facing a lot of challenges, but nevertheless, I think that we still need to stick to multilateral cooperation, and that is our best hope, because especially when we look at the climate crisis, which is my personal focus, it's that when all these crises are interlinked, and especially the climate crisis, if we don't tackle it, then we're lost, basically. We cannot solve anything else. And the climate crisis is a global issue. So for it to be solved, we need to work globally, and therefore our only hope is multilateral cooperation.
In your view, what then needs to change to make multilateralism more effective?
I think we need to include more people from most affected places and areas in decision-making processes. For example, bringing them to COP, enabling that they're there, especially youth as well. At this year's COP, there were a few great initiatives. The presidency funded a program for young people who came from least developed countries or island developing states and indigenous groups to be present at COP. And that's really important, because if we don't have these people present, who else will call for action and make sure that something changes?
Yeah. You are also really passionate about gender. So let's look a bit more now at the intersection of climate and gender. At COP28, UN Women stated that by 2050, climate change will push up to 158 million more women and girls into poverty and lead 236 million more women into hunger. They called for a feminist climate justice approach, and there are 4 areas that they call for, just briefly: recognizing women's rights, labor and knowledge, redistributing economic resources, representation of women's voices, and repairing inequalities and historical injustices. Tell us what you think about this. Do you agree that we need a feminist climate justice approach?
We definitely need a feminist climate justice approach, but to incorporate gender equality into climate justice is not complicated, because there's no climate justice without gender equality. But there are a few challenges that we are still facing, and I want to highlight 2 especially. So the first one being that often we don't recognize abilities women have, especially women in least developed countries and also most affected areas. They are responsible for bringing food on the table, work in agriculture, and also walk maybe long distances to get water. And through climate change, they face a lot of challenges to do that, and over the course of their life, they become really climate resilient and develop tactics on how to adapt in the end to some of the changements in climate. But we don't listen to these voices, or they are not heard because they are not quantified. There's no data on it, and we need to stop just thinking, oh, we need quantified data, because a lot of valuable input is not heard because people in decision-making positions do not listen to these voices, and we need to really take them into consideration. Then the second part, or the second challenge that I see, is that the ones who are most responsible for the climate crisis are still in power. I'm not talking only about states, but also multinational corporations or super rich individuals. And what we need to do is tax these people and companies. And with the money that we get out of that, we need to finance the environmental friendly development aid, and especially with a focus on gender equality, because currently only 3% of those projects have a focus on gender equality. And I think the number should be way bigger.
Yeah. How do we then overcome some of these challenges you mentioned in practice? Do you have any ideas?
I think we need to also start, maybe it's not completely answering your question, but I think we need to also include gender diverse communities within when we talk about people are disproportionately affected by the climate. We now talked about women, and I think it's really important to also mention that it's also gender diverse communities, non-binary people. So how we can overcome that, as I said already, giving spaces to young people, to people that have the knowledge, but that maybe cannot quantify it.
So opening up more spaces that maybe aren't traditionally seen as multilateral spaces, or really widening the role there of multilateralism. I also, you mentioned the fact that maybe we shouldn't just focus on things like data, although that's super important for being able to look at policies and programs. Is there, what challenges do you see for youth to be able to represent gender and, as you said, gender diverse communities at the table? Do you have any particular areas of focus there?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. So what challenges do you see for youth that are preventing them from being able to kind of integrate these ideas that you have and having more diverse representation at multilateralism, in multilateralism?
I think there are like 3 different pillars to it. I think the first one is access to information. So a lot of people don't know how to get involved or how to start, or don't have the knowledge about certain crises or how to tackle them. So we need to create spaces where people can learn, or for example, also have low threshold initiatives that enable, especially young people, to have access to information. To use my own example as a youth delegate, I go to schools, I talk to people. I think that's a good beginning, but then we also need more public participation. And through that, for example, that's what I did. I had access to information, so I applied to be a youth delegate, and then can create awareness like that, or young people can join climate strikes or other groups. For example, when we talk about the feminist climate approach, there are also a lot of feminist groups that tackle this, this topic. And then the last one is the international cooperation or collaboration. And there we really need the willingness of states to work with other people or with other stakeholders, such as young people or women. And there needs to be a kind of a two-way communication. Of course, we're, as young people, are responsible for ourselves, for our engagement, but we also need willingness for the governments or from states and multinational or international corporations to work with us, to include us, and to create a mutual trust. And I think that's important. We need more trust in this world.
Yeah. You mentioned inclusion in that way, and that youth have more abilities to be a part of multilateralism. We're moving towards the Summit of the Future, and youth engagement, youth participation is, as you mentioned, a key part of that. There are various policy briefs leading into the summit, as well as recommendations from the High-Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism. One of the 6 shifts that the HLAB recommends is on planet and people. And if we look kind of deeper into this recommendation, one key area they would like to see at the summit is that UNEP, the UN Environment Programme, is strengthened to be a more effective global environment agency, that it is more integrated in the financial system, that it has a strong public accountability platform for commitments on the environment. It becomes a global hub for conservation, preservation, and dissemination of indigenous knowledge, among other areas. Do you agree with this recommendation, and how would you kind of describe the current state of global environmental governance?
Yeah, I definitely agree with these recommendations. We need to strengthen environmental rights within multilateralism. One of the suggestions, for example, of this advisory board is to include ecocide in the statutes of the International Criminal Court. And it's just an example, but it's really important that also individuals who harm the natural system in an irreversible way are being prosecuted for it, and that this is not just something that can happen. It should be treated the same way as any other crime that threatens humanity. And this would also ensure that we can offer a livable future, prosperous and sustainable future for youth, but also future generations. And the second part of your question on how I see the state of global environmental governance, well, it's not good right now. There are too few commitments that are linked to concrete deadlines. I see too much blah blah, if I can say it like that, and we really need commitments that are linked to deadlines. Then what I also want to highlight is that under the Paris Climate Agreement, member states agreed that we want to limit climate change to 1.5 degrees, and the second goal was to limit it to 2.5 degrees. What we need to see, and nobody talks about, is that we have already failed the first goal. We won't limit climate change to 1.5 degrees, and that doesn't mean that we can give up now and just leave, because we can't leave. It's the only planet we have, and we need to make sure that now we change course. We need to fundamentally change to be sure that we meet the second goal, because that's the last chance we have, and it didn't work the way we tried to meet the first goal. And so that should be the biggest motivation to change. And I think the first change that needs to happen is that we have more evidence-based policies informed by the latest science, because what the latest science is telling us that we need to cut carbon emissions by 42% until 2030. And we can only do that with fossil fuel phase out, but none of the documents at COP or none of the outcome documents at COP call for that. Whereas the youth statement that you mentioned before calls for exactly that, and also for we need to have more subsidies for renewable energies, and we need also a phase out of subsidies for fossil fuels. But I don't see this evidence-based, such evidence-based policies in real outcome documents of COPs, and that's really something that needs to improve.
Yeah, so evidence-based policy making being a key part of multilateralism. Aneschka, thank you so much for joining us today. We wish you all the best as you continue as a Swiss Youth Rep. Our final question to you and to share with our audience is, what do you hope will be achieved at the Summit of the Future?
I hope that the Summit of the Future will create hope for youth and future generations, because sometimes I dream of a world that is more equal and just, and where all human beings can enjoy life. And this summit really has to show that this is not just a dream, but the only imaginable future.